There is a future you once planned that your soulmate never knew existed, and somehow they have just discovered a piece of it. Not a casual dream you mentioned once and forgot, but something you had genuinely considered becoming. A different place, a different career, a different lifestyle. Maybe there was a time when you imagined waking up somewhere completely unfamiliar, building something of your own, traveling farther than you ever did, or living a life that looked nothing like the one you eventually created. And when your soulmate recently learned about that version of your future, something inside them paused, because they suddenly understood that the life they associate with you was not always the destination. There was another road, and for reasons they may only now be beginning to understand, you chose a different one. Watch what this does to someone who once believed they knew your story. They begin asking questions that have no easy answers. Why did you change your plans? What happened between the person who imagined that future and the person they eventually met? And perhaps the question that stayed with them the longest was much more personal. If you had followed that original plan, would the two of you have ever met at all? They may have never realized how many decisions had to happen before your paths could cross. One choice could have placed you somewhere else. One opportunity could have changed your timing. One disappointment could have closed a door that eventually led you toward another. And now your soulmate is looking backward at your life with a completely different perspective. They are not simply curious about what you wanted. They are wondering about the version of you they would never have known. If this message speaks to something you have experienced, and this ministry has brought you encouragement, reflection, or comfort, you can support the work through the donation link in the description or pinned comment. Give only if you genuinely feel led and only what you can comfortably afford. If you cannot donate, your like, subscription, comment, or sharing this message is already meaningful support. Because what your soulmate just discovered may have opened a door neither of you expected. The possibility that one abandoned future quietly changed the entire story that came after it. They may now be beginning to understand that your original future did not simply disappear. Something happened that redirected you, and that redirection may have changed far more than you ever realized at the time. Perhaps there was a decision you made because circumstances forced you to choose differently. Perhaps an opportunity appeared and then disappeared. Perhaps you were preparing to move somewhere, pursue a completely different career, build something of your own, or start a life that seemed almost certain until one unexpected event changed the direction. And maybe you never explained the entire story to your soulmate because, at the time, there was no reason to. They met you after the turning point. They knew the person standing in front of them, not the person who had been preparing to become someone else. That distinction is becoming important now, because when your soulmate discovered your old plan, they may have realized that there was an entire chapter of your life they never knew existed. They may have assumed that the life you eventually created was always the life you wanted. They may have believed your choices were straightforward, but now they can see that your present was built from decisions made under circumstances they never witnessed. And that can make them look at your journey differently. They may start wondering about the exact moment everything changed. Was there one conversation, one disappointment, one person, one opportunity, one decision that looked small at the time but eventually redirected years of your life? The strange thing about these moments is that we rarely recognize their importance while they are happening. You make a choice because it seems necessary, practical, or simply right at the time. You close one door without knowing which door will open afterward. You think you are losing a future when perhaps you are only moving toward a future you cannot yet see. And your soulmate may now be realizing that this happened in your life. The future you once imagined did not necessarily fail. It simply became impossible, and another version of your life began taking shape. That may be why the discovery has affected them more than they expected. They are not just learning an interesting fact about your past. They are realizing that your entire path could have been different. If one decision had changed, perhaps you would have lived somewhere else. You might have met different people, developed different ambitions, carried different experiences, and become someone with an entirely different emotional landscape. And then comes the thought they may not want to admit. Perhaps they would never have met you. Think about how powerful that realization can be. Your soulmate may have always looked at your meeting as something that simply happened. Two people crossed paths, connected, shared something meaningful, and eventually experienced whatever followed. But now they can see the invisible chain behind it. The decisions you made before they entered your life may have been quietly guiding you toward the exact circumstances where your paths could intersect. They may wonder whether the future you abandoned created the space for the future you actually lived. And that is where their thoughts may become emotional. Because sometimes we spend years mourning the roads we did not take without realizing that those roads may have led away from everything we eventually became. Your soulmate cannot know whether the alternate life would have been better. They can only imagine it. And imagination has a strange habit of making the road not taken look perfect. It removes the disappointments, the complications, the unexpected difficulties, and shows only the beautiful possibility. They may picture you living that life and wonder how happy you would have been, but they cannot see what you would have struggled with there. They cannot know who would have hurt you, what opportunities would have disappeared, or which experiences would have shaped you differently. All they can see is a possibility, and that possibility may be enough to make them appreciate the complexity of your actual journey. They may begin understanding that the person they eventually met was not created by one decision. You were shaped by every door that opened and every door that closed. You became who you are through the plans that worked and the plans that failed, through the opportunities you accepted and the ones you had to release. And perhaps your soulmate is now realizing that they fell in love with someone whose story was already full of unexpected turns before they ever arrived. They may wonder whether your connection itself was another unexpected turn, another moment where life quietly changed direction without either of you recognizing its significance. That question will lead them somewhere deeper, because once they begin tracing the path backward, they may discover that one seemingly ordinary decision had consequences neither of you could have predicted. And that is where the real what could have been begins, not with regret, but with the realization that your life could have taken countless different shapes, and somehow, through all those possibilities, you still ended up becoming the person they remember. And now, something even more interesting may be happening inside your soulmate, because learning about your old plan has opened the door to a future that never happened. They may have started imagining it without even intending to. They may wonder where you would be living today, what you would be doing, who would be around you, and what kind of person you would have become if that original plan had actually unfolded. At first, it may have been nothing more than curiosity. But the more they think about it, the more emotional it becomes, because they are no longer imagining a random future. They are imagining a version of you they never got to meet, and that version of you may look strangely unfamiliar. Perhaps you would have been more adventurous. Perhaps you would have become more ambitious, more independent, or more guarded. Maybe you would have developed completely different interests and surrounded yourself with people your soulmate has never heard of. They may even wonder whether you would have been happier, but there is something they cannot know, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes the thought so powerful. They cannot compare the life you actually lived with the life you might have lived, because only one of those lives exists. The other exists entirely inside imagination. And imagination has a way of creating beautiful versions of roads we never walked. Your soulmate may be doing this now, wondering about every little detail. What would your mornings look like? What would you care about? Would you still have the same personality? Would you still laugh the same way? Would you have become the person they eventually knew? Or would that alternate life have created someone completely different? And then the thought may become even more personal. If you had followed that plan, would they have ever found you? Would your paths have crossed in another city, another workplace, another season of life? Or would they have passed through the world without ever knowing your name? That question can create a strange mixture of gratitude and sadness, because suddenly your soulmate may understand that their connection with you depended on countless circumstances they had never considered. You had to be in a certain place. They had to be in a certain place. Certain doors had to close. Other doors had to open. Timing had to align. And neither of you had control over all of it. If this message is speaking to you deeply, and you feel that this ministry has helped you reflect on your journey, your relationships, and the unexpected turns life has taken, there is a donation link in the description and pinned comment for anyone who genuinely feels led to support this work. Your contribution helps us continue creating these messages and reaching people who may be listening during a moment when they need encouragement or clarity. Please give only what feels comfortable for you, and if you cannot donate, that is completely okay. Your support through subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this message with someone who needs it is already meaningful. Now think about what your soulmate may be realizing as they continue imagining that alternate life. They may begin comparing the person you are now with the person you might have become, and perhaps they are noticing something unexpected. The life you actually lived gave you qualities the alternate version of you may never have developed. The disappointments taught you patience. The changes taught you adaptability. The closed doors taught you how to create another path. The experiences you never planned for may have given you the strength, wisdom, and emotional depth that eventually became part of the person your soulmate knew. In other words, the future you abandoned may have changed you, but the future you actually lived also changed you. And now they are beginning to understand that there is no way to know whether the road not taken would have brought you closer to happiness or farther away from it. They can only wonder, and perhaps that is why they keep thinking about it. Because underneath the curiosity is a much more personal question. What if the life you almost lived would have prevented the two of you from ever meeting? What if the plan you abandoned was not the future you were supposed to have, but simply one of the many possibilities your life had to release? And what if the unexpected path you took was the one that eventually brought you into their world? They may never get a definite answer, neither will you. But sometimes the unanswered question is exactly what makes a past possibility so powerful. It does not need to become real to leave an emotional imprint. And your soulmate may now be carrying the strange realization that the person they once knew exists because of a series of choices and circumstances they never understood. They are not only wondering what your life could have been, they are wondering whether, on that other road, they would have lost the chance to know you at all. And now the question becomes much more personal, because your soulmate may no longer be thinking only about the future you once planned. They may be wondering whether they themselves became part of the reason your life eventually took the direction it did. They may be looking back at the timeline of your connection and noticing how many things happened around the same period. Maybe you changed your plans shortly before meeting them. Maybe you abandoned one dream after an experience that changed your priorities. Maybe meeting them introduced you to ideas, places, emotions, or possibilities you had never considered before. Or perhaps the connection did not directly change your plans at all, but it became part of the chain of events that eventually shaped the person you became. And that realization can be surprisingly emotional because they may have never understood how much timing mattered. They knew what happened between you, but they did not know everything that had to happen before you could meet. Now, after learning about the future you once imagined, they may be mentally placing your old plans beside the reality that followed. They may be asking themselves whether they arrived in your life at exactly the moment they were supposed to, or whether the two of you simply happened to cross paths because a completely different future had already fallen apart. They may wonder what would have happened if you had stayed committed to your original plan. Would you have moved away? Would you have entered another career? Would you have met someone else? Would they have been somewhere completely different? These questions can become strangely difficult to answer because there is no evidence for the alternate timeline. There is only imagination, and yet imagination can make the past feel incredibly close. Your soulmate may even wonder whether you ever think about that old future yourself. Whether there are moments when you still remember the person you once expected to become. Whether part of you ever wonders about that road. But there is an important distinction they may eventually discover. Wondering about an old future does not mean wishing you could return to it. Sometimes we remember the person we thought we would become simply because that person was important to who we eventually became. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to understand that now. If this message has touched something real inside you, and you feel that this ministry has been a source of encouragement through the unexpected seasons of your life, there is a donation link in the description and in the pinned comment for anyone who genuinely feels led to support this work. Your generosity helps us continue creating these messages and reaching people who may be quietly searching for hope, perspective, or simply a reminder that an unexpected life can still become a meaningful one. Please give only what you can comfortably afford. And if financial support is not possible, your subscription, like, comment, or sharing this message with someone who needs it is just as appreciated. Now your soulmate may be reaching an even deeper realization. Perhaps they are beginning to understand that they were not simply another event in your life. Their presence may have coincided with a period when you were already changing. You were becoming more aware of what mattered to you, what you could no longer accept, and what kind of future you genuinely wanted. They may have witnessed only part of that transformation, and because they only saw the final version, they may never have understood what it took for you to get there. This could make them rethink certain moments between you. Maybe something they once believed was caused by them was actually part of a much larger transformation happening inside you. Maybe they thought you were choosing against them when you were really choosing a new direction for yourself. Maybe they believed your decisions were about the relationship when they were actually about the person you were becoming. And now, with this new information about your old plans, those memories may be shifting again. They may wonder whether the two of you were caught in a much larger story neither of you could see at the time. That does not mean every event was destined or that every painful moment had to happen. It simply means that life is often built from decisions whose consequences become visible much later. And your soulmate may now be realizing that the person they met was the result of a journey that began long before them. They may wonder whether they would have recognized you on the alternate road, or whether you would have been so different that the connection would never have existed. And perhaps that is the thought that stays with them the longest. They are not just wondering what could have been for you. They are wondering what could have been for both of you if one decision had gone another way. But there is still one realization waiting at the end of this thought process, and it may completely change how they see the future you once left behind. Because eventually they may understand that the road you did not take did not necessarily represent the life you lost. It may have simply been the road that led you toward a life they never expected you to live, and toward the person they eventually came to know. And this is where the entire story begins to make sense. Because your soulmate may finally be realizing that the future you once planned was never proof that your present life went wrong. It was simply another possibility, a road you once believed you would take until life gave you a reason to turn somewhere else. And now, after discovering that old plan, they may be looking at you and wondering about everything that could have happened differently. They may imagine the person you might have become, the places you might have lived, the people you might have met, and the experiences that might have shaped you. But the deeper they go into that imagined future, the more they may understand something important. They are grieving a possibility, not a reality. They do not actually know whether that life would have been better. They only know that it existed once in your mind, and that you eventually chose something different. Perhaps they are realizing that if you had followed that original plan, the two of you may never have met. Maybe your paths would have remained completely separate. Maybe they would have become a stranger whose name you never knew. And that thought can create a strange kind of gratitude, because the very circumstances that once looked like disappointment may have eventually placed you exactly where your life needed you to be. This does not mean every painful event was necessary or that every closed door had some predetermined purpose. It means you cannot always recognize the value of a new direction while you are standing inside the uncertainty that created it. Sometimes the meaning only becomes visible years later. Your soulmate may now be seeing that in your story. The plan you abandoned may have been important because it taught you what you wanted, what you valued, and what you were willing to release. But the life you actually lived gave you experiences the old plan never could have predicted. It created the version of you your soulmate eventually met. And perhaps that is the part they are struggling to understand now. They thought they were getting to know you as you were, without realizing how many invisible decisions had already shaped you before they arrived. They may now look back and wonder whether they were meant to meet the person you became, rather than the person you once intended to become. And there is something deeply humbling about that realization, because nobody gets to see the entire chain of events that creates a meaningful connection while it is happening. You simply live your days. You make decisions. You change plans. You accept opportunities. You survive disappointments. You keep moving. And somewhere along the way, someone enters your life and becomes important. Only later do you realize how many different things had to happen for that meeting to occur. If this message has encouraged you to look at your own journey differently, remember that this ministry continues because people who believe in these messages help us keep creating them. If you feel genuinely led to support the ministry, there is a donation link in the description and pinned comment. Your contribution, whatever you can comfortably give, helps us continue reaching people who may be listening during a difficult or uncertain chapter of their own lives. And if you cannot give financially, please do not feel pressured. Your support through a like, subscription, comment, or sharing this message with someone who needs it is deeply appreciated. Now perhaps your soulmate is finally understanding why learning about your old future affected them so much. It was never just about the plan. It was about realizing that your life could have taken countless directions, and yet somehow the two of you still crossed paths. They may never know exactly what would have happened on the road you did not take. You may never know either, but you do know what happened on the road you actually walked. You became stronger. You learned. You changed. You discovered parts of yourself that the old version of your future could never have predicted. And somewhere along that unexpected road, you met people, experienced moments, and became someone capable of feeling things you once could not imagine. Your soulmate may continue wondering what could have been, and that is human. But perhaps the most peaceful truth is that what could have been does not have to become what should have been. An alternate future can remain beautiful without becoming your destination. A closed door can remain meaningful without needing to reopen. And a person can wonder about the life you almost lived while still recognizing the value of the life you actually created. Your soulmate may have discovered an old plan, but what they truly discovered was something much bigger. Your story was never as predictable as they thought. You were always capable of changing direction. You were always becoming, and perhaps the greatest surprise is that the future you once thought you wanted led you toward a version of yourself that could recognize a completely different future when it arrived. So let them wonder. Let them imagine the road not taken. You do not have to solve that mystery for them. Your life is not defined by the future you abandoned. It is defined by the courage you had to keep walking after it changed. And if they are now looking back and quietly asking, what if? Perhaps the answer is not that you lost the future you once planned. Perhaps you simply discovered a future you could never have planned, and that future became the life you are living now.